I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, to sit down together at the table of brotherhood.
What if Martin Luther King Jr. had lived beyond that "I have a dream" speech? What if the most important part of his message wasn't celebrated, but silenced?
This is Timeless Perspective, where history comes alive.
In classrooms and documentaries, we are taught about a dreamer, a peaceful preacher, and a unifier. That was Martin Luther King Jr., but near the end of his life, he was no longer applauded in the White House or embraced by the media.
I accept this award on behalf of a civil rights movement.
He had become something far more dangerous to the establishment, a radical critic of America's economic system, its foreign wars, and its moral failings.
We rally at the United Nations in order to reaffirm our support of the principles of peace.
And that not the dream is what made him a threat to the establishment. But why? Why was he viewed as a threat to the establishment? Why did history sanitize his message and try to kill his dream? MLK is remembered as a national icon of unity. In his final years, he didn't just march for civil rights. He marched against economic exploitation. And he spoke out against the Vietnam War.
Universality, equal rights, and self-determination of people.
He called America the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today.
Embodied in the Charter and acclaimed by mankind, but violated by the United States.
These are not the words of a man content with symbolic progress. These are the words of someone willing to pay the price for truth. History has sanitized his message. But how can we truly understand MLK's full legacy? How can we look beyond the dream and into the fire he walked through to understand the man and his dream?
I have a dream.
In 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. had grown disillusioned with the limits of civil rights victories. Yes, black Americans could now vote. Yes, segregation was outlawed. But poverty, inequality, and police brutality remained widespread.
I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and the crooked places will be made straight.
Martin Luther King Jr. began organizing what he called the Poor People's Campaign, a multiracial coalition of the poor, working class, and dispossessed. He believed the next frontier of justice was economic.
New beginning on the economic front.
And it wasn't just a black issue, it was an American issue.
This nation will rise up, that all men are created equal.
How did the establishment respond? They were terrified. Can you imagine this peaceful preacher uniting the poor across racial lines, then demanding economic restructuring?
I have a dream that one day
We assemble here together today with common problems, bringing together ethnic groups that maybe have not been together in this type of meeting in the past.
That was more threatening than marches in Selma. It meant real redistribution of power. In private, FBI memos labeled King a danger to national security. The same agencies that once protected his marches were now watching him like a hawk, as an enemy. What did King do? On April 4th, 1967, King gave a speech titled Beyond Vietnam. In it, he denounced the war as unjust and immoral. He connected military violence abroad to poverty at home. He said, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social upliftment is approaching spiritual death." This was exactly 1 year before he was assassinated. What did King envisioned?
little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers.
A mass nonviolent occupation of Washington, D.C., where thousands of poor families would set up camp and demand jobs, housing, and a living wage. It wasn't about charity. It was about dignity, justice, and structural change.
This will be the day. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become
Some
true.
fellow civil rights leaders distanced themselves from him. Donors pulled their fundings. The media turned hostile, but King pressed on. He knew that moral clarity often comes with isolation. He understood, like Socrates or Kierkegaard, that to speak uncomfortable truths is to be misunderstood, or worse, silenced. And what did Martin Luther King Jr. aim to achieve? He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to be a catalyst for change. He said, True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes by recognizing that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. In Memphis, while supporting sanitation workers on strike, he lived this principle. He said, "All labor has dignity." He stood with the poor, the workers, and the invisible, and that's where he spent his final days. On April 4th, 1968, exactly 1 year after his speech, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. He was 39. He died not as a dreamer in Washington, but as a radical in Memphis. The Poor People's Campaign would go on without him, but without its soul. At his funeral, the media praised his dream, but few mentioned his warning that America's soul was at stake, that justice required more than just laws, that it required sacrifice, redistribution of wealth, and a complete rethinking of how we treat the poor, the workers, and the invisible. What can we learn from Martin Luther King's life and journey? Yes, MLK lived what Viktor Frankl called tragic optimism, which is hope rooted in suffering. He knew change would be slow. It wouldn't happen overnight. He knew he wouldn't see the promised land. Yet still, he moved forward. That is true leadership, to walk through the fire not because you will win, but because it is the right thing to do. Psychologically, King represented moral courage, this rare ability to act in alignment with conscience, not consequence. He understood that to love your enemies is not weakness, it's defiance. To preach peace while being surveilled and threatened requires strength deeper than fear itself. Today, we live in an age of polished optics, curated narratives, and in fear of cancellation. But MLK didn't care if he lost support. He cared about the soul of a nation, about justice that costs something, and that's the message we're not taught. Many of us, we remember the dream because it's easy to digest, but we forget the radical because it makes us uncomfortable. But if we want to honor his legacy, if we truly want to embrace his dream, we must wrestle with both. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't die dreaming. He died marching, organizing, and defying systems of oppression. So ask yourself, what would you risk for justice? What truth would you speak, even if it cost you everything? Think on this as you reflect on timeless perspective. Subscribe if you believe history has more to teach. Share if you believe the dream is only the beginning. Because the most dangerous thing about Martin Luther King Jr. was not his dream. It was his courage to keep going after the applause stopped. For this, he was silenced.